All right, Jason Sheffield, welcome to the Christ Quest. This is gonna be a fun conversation. Just
Yeah.
a little bit. We've already chatted in ENTV today about other stuff, and then I invited Jason over. Actually, I don't know if I invited you over. You're the one that said, "Hey, I don't know." So you said something, and I'm like, "Let's do this." So, the Christ Quest. The purpose again of these conversations is to hold space for things that you can't talk about in mainstream religion. Now, be that
Mm.
there's a lot of focus here on Christianity, obviously, with Christ in the name. The purpose of the group, though, is to hold conversations around what is Christ, what's Christ consciousness, whether it's the man or the ideal or anything surrounding that. This is a place of where it's safe to talk about a whole lot of stuff. So, all that to say, Jason, welcome to the Christ Quest.
Mm. Thanks, Amos. Yeah, we popped on the other interview, and then I saw this. I said, "Man, I like talking business. I love talking about Jesus. So let's hang out." And this to me is really exciting just to see a space like this happening, where more and more people are asking these kind of questions because they're questions I've been asking. And sometimes it can feel lonely because you feel like, you're the only one beginning to ask these things. So it's fun to come across like-minded people and to get to have conversations like this. Oh, we lost your audio. There we
Agreed.
go.
Sorry, I was mute out here. For those that don't know you, can you give a bit of backstory? Because we're gonna go into some out there stuff today. But can you? How were you raised? What did that look like
Yeah.
growing up?
Yeah, I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which for people that have been in the evangelical world is like a mecca of evangelicalism, right? We were like the hometown of Focus on the Family and James Dobson. We had three or four absolutely massive mega churches that really paved the way when the mega church movement was happening. We have really great Christian organizations like Compassion International that has really made a big influence. So we're in this weird little kind of place, and I grew up here. This was home. I moved here when I was 6, and went right into the Christian education. I went to the main private school in town. I graduated from there with a small stint of homeschooling. But I grew up in the church. And in fact, when I was in the church, I always remember feeling this tension that I didn't have a good conversion testimony. Growing up, going to chapels and all these things, the stories of people would be these people that lived in darkness and then experienced Jesus, and it was life transforming. And I was just trying to be a good Christian boy. And so I always joke that I had the most vanilla testimonial because I was born into this thing. I preached my first sermon at 17 and knew I wanted to be a pastor very early on. So yeah, that's how I was raised and grew up in this stuff.
Okay, so before we get into what happened since, what did it feel like being in that? Like I say this because everything to me is an indoctrination camp. Whether I'm
Mm.
in yoga training, or I'm studying Pilates, or I'm studying whatever, everything is a form of indoctrination. So in that form of indoctrination camp, in my opinion anyway, what was your experience like internally? You said vanilla. I feel very vanilla. What else was going on in you, Jason? Because you're preaching a sermon. Like, what is your goal? What is your hope? What is your life vision you're aiming at?
So there's kind of two parts that I'm hearing there. There's the indoctrination side, and then what was I doing with that indoctrination? So, again, I was naive to a lot of it. And frankly, I've done enough work around it that I can now look back and actually honor the level of order that I grew up in. That indoctrination could also be viewed as like systems and structures and just order. And so there wasn't a lot of chaos. I look at the world now, and on some levels, like there's some things that are really great. Like I was protected from, partying at too young of an age, or having a lot of, sex at too young of an age, or things like. So in some levels, yes, there was the indoctrination of that those things were evil. But there's the other side of it where I didn't have a lot of baggage. I didn't have a lot of stuff that I had to work through later in life. Of course, it came back around and I had to work through it, but there's some positives to it. And I've tried to look back on, honor those things, like what was good about growing up in the indoctrination, because I can talk a lot about the bad. So and I'm sure we'll be getting into some of that, but there were elements that I felt like were good. It was healthy. I was around men. I've had strong relationships with men my entire life. I understood the value of that. I had a deep connection to spirit and what does it look like to live a spirit-led life where you're really trying to engage something bigger than yourself and the way that that offers service to the world. These were good things that I was trying to figure out. In execution, obviously there was a lot of challenges that came with it. There was a lot of repression. There was a lot of feeling like, you didn't always fit in. And even within the indoctrination, I was a bit of a challenger. I like to question things. So I was always kind of on the edge, even though I was deeply in it.
Okay, so what happened? Let's go to life-changing moments for you. And then
Mm.
I want to get into next, where are you actually at today? So like life-changing moments and any order you want to hit stuff, please.
Yeah, like I'll try to give just a quick chronological summary because it kind of plays out to where I'm at today. So, that was kind of that high school growing up phase. Right off the bat, I go to a Bible school in England just to continue the depth because I want to be a pastor. So I spend a year doing that. And then I began to shift into the actual practical application of how am I going to become a pastor. I get married very young at 21. At that point, she had been like my high school sweetheart. We grew up in the same church. We'd met when we were 12. So it was really, really kind of that depth, just pursuing that path. I work at several churches throughout my 20s. I pursue being a church planter. Move out to Philadelphia and do an apprenticeship program to learn how to plant churches. So I'm beginning to really develop that skill set. Even though there's these things that I don't like about it and I don't know that I fit, I'm trying to do it. Moved to Lincoln, Nebraska to work in a mega church. Absolutely hate that expression. Realize that's not right for me at all. Come back home to Colorado Springs, get kind of with the vision of no longer being a pastor, but now moving into business. And so there's a death that takes place, the death of an identity that I've been developing for a long time. And that death really came to fruition when a church that we had been investing in, just as practitioners, lay people, I had a job, but we were investing, we were leading a small group and all that kind of stuff. I was actually an elder at the church. They kind of asked me to step into that. And after about 3 meetings of that, they kicked me out because I am not in alignment with the bigger vision any longer, and I'm challenging them. And that really was the death for me of the idea of being a pastor. And I began to really start asking some hard questions about the indoctrination that I grew up with. I start questioning things like the virgin birth of Jesus, and I start questioning things like hell and eternal fire and damnation for a soul that doesn't say a specific prayer, right? Start going through the deconstruction of all of the stuff that I had grown up with, which caused a lot of turmoil in my personal life, turmoil in my marriage. And frankly, it led me to then not feeling like I could fully show up. So I really compartmentalized my life. I still had to do the church thing to keep up with the Joneses and the family, but internally, I'm dying. It's not working for me anymore. And that death then led me to making some really unwise and unhealthy choices, like entering into an affair with a coworker that lasted for 4 years. So there's this period of time where I'm just trying to keep everything moving forward in my life because I feel like I have to, but frankly, everything is beginning to crumble inside. And so once that was exposed, my life completely blew up. Everything was gone. I had 3 children with my ex. And so I'm at like bare bones, that dark night of the soul moment of like, who am I? What do I believe? And in the last 3 to 4 years has been the rebuilding process to where I'm at today. So that's a brief summary of kind of my experiences.
Wow, and you grew up always asking questions. So as a kid, were you a challenger? You like to dig deeper? Did that start in your teens, or was it always?
Yeah, I was always more of an intellectual challenger. I was kind of conflict avoidant in the sense that if someone didn't agree with me, I kind of like, but in my own head, in my own psyche, in my own heart, I did ask a lot of questions, and I felt like I was often called to the edges of Christianity. At that point, there was a movement called the emerging church, where there was this kind of shift out of evangelicalism, and it was led by some pioneers like Rob Bell and Brian McLaren. So I was reading these guys, and people in my current circles were like, oh no, that's, post-modernity, and we got to challenge post-modern, all these buzzwords that were floating around in the early 2000s. But I was into it, man. I was believing it. I was, Rob Bell, hook, line, sinker. Listening to church the true pioneers of podcasting were the pastors. I don't think they get enough credit for this movement of podcasting because, the early 2000s, they were posting sermons, and I was sitting in my car and listening to these lectures. And those were kind of those first experiences of getting outside of my local pastor and tapping into a movement that I believe was beginning to happen 20 years ago.
Wow. Okay, so let's jump to what do you believe about Christ? What is Christ? Who is Christ? How do you articulate it? How do you integrate with it? And then let's go back to these. You got a number of life-changing moments, including psychedelics, which we're going to get into,
Yeah,
which have
absolutely.
changed my life too. So I'm curious your experience. So can we just hit though first? Currently, what do you see Christ as? What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So I like playing with the idea of maybe. Okay. So anything we talk about, just it's important to know, like for me, my posture is very much a maybe posture. And so I definitely play with the idea that Jesus was maybe a physical man that was here on this plane. Seems like there's a lot of evidence for some sort of expression in texts that are outside of the Bible, referencing this man that was doing this stuff. So I'm open to the possibility that Jesus was a physical man that was cruising around in Jerusalem, doing some of these things that we see reflected in holy texts and other sources. So that seems like a possibility. More though, what I feel like I continue to tap into is the consciousness that the Christ represents, and being able to peel back those layers and to look at this idea that of these teachings and these core wisdom traditions that the Christ represents is actually reflected in a lot of other places. So I've done the work in digging into other traditions, other religions of Buddhism and Hinduism, and I found a lot of truths in those. But what's been interesting is I keep coming back to the stream that I've grown up in, which is Christianity. So it's hard for me to feel like I would want to shift into being calling myself a Buddhist per se, because that's not my stream. I haven't grown up with that in my life. And so I explored all those things, and I kind of had this return, and it was largely through working with mushrooms and psychedelics of this integration that, man, I have this deep love for the Christ. I'm on a path of figuring out who is the Christ, what is Jesus, and being able to have peace around it versus all of the deconstruction, which was just anger, frustration. How could the religion teach me these things? And we all have to go through that. And I think on a level, just collectively, we're going through that. There's a lot of people that are in that deconstruction. But for me, there's something on the other side of deconstruction, and it's, integration, right? It's building again. And now I'm trying to build my life listening to the wisdoms of Christ consciousness. What are the principles? What are the teachings? Are these things, do they hold weight? And so now I look at it from a perspective of what are these wisdoms? And so when I'm reading the Gospels, when I'm reading other texts, to me, it's about, can I pull together the dots of saying, man, there's really something here. Like there's something to this Christ consciousness thing. And it's really powerful.
Wow, you're well spoken, Jason. Well
Mm,
spoken. So okay, let's jump into it. You open it up and let's go there. Psychedelics. So
yeah.
what do you want to talk about there? Like again, there's no holds barred with me. I'm open to whatever you want to talk about. So let's go where you want to go and talk about what is it done and why and how did you even give yourself permission to go there? Because
Yeah.
I was scared to do it. And I felt
Yeah.
I was supposed to do it. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't, fill in the blank, raised Christian boy. I don't do drugs. I don't
Mhm.
sleep around. I don't blah, 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 blah. So what was your experience like that?
Well, after I'd blown up my life and all of those things that I said I would never do, right now are public, and there's all these elements. It's for me, this comes in. I'd begun reading other people that had gone through this deconstruction thing. One main guy like Michael Gungor, who was a big worship guy, he wrote a beautiful book called This that talked about his work with mushrooms. There's a comedian named Pete Holmes who wrote a book called Comedy, Sex, God, and he talked about it. So these people that I was paying attention to that felt like salve to the soul that was hurting were all talking about doing mushrooms. And so I said, okay, I'm open. What is this thing? What's going on? I got to do my research. So I dive into reading a book that now has become kind of one of the most popular ones of How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And as I'm reading it, I'm in therapy, I'm doing my work. It's the middle of COVID, right? We're all shut down. I'm living in a small apartment. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready for this, but I have no idea how to get access to it. I've never had anybody in my life that I've, known that's done these things. So I kind of just have this put out to the universe of saying, great, when the time is right, the mushrooms will appear and I will be ready. So I entered into the work of being prepared for it through stepping into meditation, because that was some of the wisdom that I had picked up along the way was, if you can't sit with your mind for 20 minutes, dropping into a journey is going to be really difficult. So get comfortable being with your head and the mind, right? And also understanding we're getting behind the mind in that practice, because those are going to be similar to some things that come up in the mushroom work. So I'm in that space. And then I meet my partner. We've been together now for 4 years. And she came over one night early on in our dating relationship and said, I have a proposal. I've got some mushrooms or I have an edible. What do you want to do tonight? And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Thank you, universe. Let's do some mushrooms. So our first experience was like very, very light. I think I did less than a gram. But it was profound. It had some really heart-opening moments. The experience was very euphoric. It wasn't necessarily very challenging. And I would, after, we did it like on a Sunday night, and I was like, can I go to work tomorrow? She's like, yeah, you'll be fine. Right. So I wake up, I'm like, I'm fine. There's no like hangover, all those stories that you tell yourself. I was like, wow, like this, I just feel like I'm back and I'm normal. And I was like, okay, I'm ready to start doing deeper work with this. That just basically led us down the path of going deeper with the medicine. We started doing work with it about every couple months. We would get away, go to the mountains, have some space with it, and the work is starting to deepen. More and more stuff is starting to open up for me. And I decided I want to actually get some formal training with it. So I go through a process of becoming an integration coach. And in that, I learn a lot about the spiritual side of working with the mushrooms. And it's just resonating with my pastoral heart. Like, oh my gosh, this is the same stuff that we're talking about here. And this work is really profound and really deep and totally different than anything I thought it was. It's deeply spiritual. And so I then jump in and I have like a hero's dose. So I go into that like 5-gram space where it's way more challenging. It has, all sorts of different textures to it. But in that journey, my heart for Christ opens up. And I have this big emotional release where I just quit fighting the deconstruction, all the things that was wrong. And I give myself permission to go on a path of falling in love with Jesus again. Because I needed to heal the relationships of like, I needed to first heal the relationship of understanding the Christ. Then it was about understanding God. And then it was understanding spirit. So I needed to look at it Trinitarianly, like, because these are different ways that it's being expressed. So that sends me down to starting to read the Bible. And I crush the New Testament. And I freaking love it. It's making so much sense to me. It's like I can see it in a completely new way. I have a new lens on life. The mushrooms shifted so much. And so that just led to doing deeper and deeper work with the mushrooms. I was working with some other medicines as well, but psilocybin was the main one. And it all culminated with, and I would never recommend this, right? These are only my experiences. But it ended with doing a 24-gram journey. So like a mega dose. And in that space and in that big dose, I experienced death. I full on believed that it was going to kill me, even though I knew I was safe, even though I was in a totally safe space. And there's no, you can eat your body weight in mushrooms. They're not going to kill you. But it physically, mentally, I felt like I was on the edge of death. And it was the scariest, most challenging thing that I had ever gone through. But as I worked through it and I went through the rebirth process and I gave myself that ability to kind of come back, I then entered into like 10 hours of being completely tapped in and connected to God. And it was the most profound, deeply spiritual experience of my life. And in that space, it just was like, okay, like it's here. Like, of course, you know, Jesus said, like, you don't get to enter into the kingdom of God until you died. And this was a death. And through that death, I experienced something on the other side. And all of a sudden, this deep peace came over me that, like, I don't know what the fuck heaven is, but I know it's not done. It can't be. Nowhere does anything ever actually be done. It's just a transmutation. And so beginning to understand that, then again, just deepened my understanding of the teachings of the Christ. What are these things that we're really talking about? And so from that space, I now have I do a lot of integration work with people. I do, you know, work with men. And now I'm in a place where I don't need to go as deep with the mushrooms. I don't need to have those deeper experiences. Now it's about just integrating it, right? Integrating it on this plane, living it out, living my life based on these principles. So sorry, that was a lot there, but that's a little bit of the work
Wow,
with the mushrooms.
that's amazing. Well, I was baptized 3 times because I wanted something to click, and it never did. And I wanted to follow, but then my only and first experience with MDMA was more transformative in my life than
Mm.
all the
So
worship
how
services, all the anything I did.
so how for you did you come to this place of feeling reconnected to Christ or Christ consciousness?
Well, I'm in process. I don't know. All I know is this is my currently how I see the world type thing. So I hold loosely what I say I believe because I keep getting proven the more I stay on the path of wanting to be shown. Like this week, I was shown more things that I didn't see clearly last week. And if I had have
Mm.
clung to my beliefs last week, so I referenced it kind of like what you said. It's like you're holding space for possibilities. So that's how everything I reference now, it's what I currently presently believe, knowing full well that I'll be shown probably more truth next week. So that everything is that's how I integrate with everything.
Mm. I think it was Carl Jung that talked about this idea that um this idea that, like, someone asked him, does he believe in God? And he said, no, I don't believe, I know. And at the first time I heard that, it was like kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It felt like, wait a minute, you mean like this deep certitude? Like what is that? Because I really shifted some things in my life where I was like, I'm not going to believe in anything as a certitude, right? Because I saw the dangers of that in fundamentalism. Like fundamentalism is built around certitudes. And it doesn't matter whether that's being expressed in religion or politics or whatever. The people that are the most fundamental are the ones that are most certain. And so I felt this sense of like of coming out of that deep fundamentalism, like I don't want to be certain about anything. But in these experiences that I've had, there has been a little bit of a shift to saying, and yet I still have to believe in something. There still has to be a north. There still has to be something that I'm willing to orient my life towards to say, I am certain that this is my experience. And so being able to kind of look at truth through two perspectives, which one principle that I've really come to believe is that for truth to be true, it must be a paradox. It always, all truths are paradoxical. If someone is saying that something is truth, and there's not a paradoxical element to it, it is not true. So Christ is both the man and God. How does that work? I don't know, but it feels like a paradox. So for me, when I think about the elements of what do I believe to be true, it is these elements of like I'm orienting myself to north because I have to set my standard into something to build around. If I'm feeling flowy all the time in that state, I'm not building anything. And that's, again, I think we go through seasons. And so I've been really talking about the shift from deconstruction to decomposition, right? We can deconstruct all day long, but we're not really having any progress in our lives and we're not having any progress in our spiritual lives. So what if we just lay that stuff to rest and we bury it and we let it go through the transmutation of decomposition for something new to come forth? And so for me, that's been something I've been really paying attention to in my life is like, what is that I can, what newness am I seeing? Because you're right.
Wow, love that.
Truth can be both absolute and it's experiential. That was where I was that point of like, when it comes to truth, I have to believe in the absolute, the absolute truth. But I also have to believe in the ability that there is an unlimited amount of possibilities for that truth to get expressed, because as human beings, we are that expression of the truth. And so it's going to be all over the place.
Wow, we can go a lot of places there. So for those that, can we go a bit more into then, how do you integrate all of this together? What, because you talked about leaving, deconstructing, and now using different phraseology to turn it into, but then you're also now in love with the Christ, in love with scriptures. So because why? Because they are giving you access to thoughts, to new considerations, or what is it about the scriptures you're loving?
Just being able to play with them, right? For so long, especially in fundamentalism, the Bible had to be the inerrant word of God. It had to be true. It had to be infallible. It had to play by all these rules, because in fundamentalism, I genuinely believe they began to understand the Trinity of God as God, Christ, and the Holy Scriptures, right? The idea of anything else like didn't exist. So everything had, and so in that fundamentalist biblical worldview, I didn't get to play with the Bible. The Bible had to play by the rules that they had set up, and the Bible doesn't really play by those rules. So once I began to like let myself play and begin to think about, what if Moses never existed? Massive person in the Old Testament, right? I mean, the Torah, right? We talk about being the Bible or the books of Moses, but like, you start looking at things from a different angle, and there's a lot of proof that says Moses probably never existed. So what is that? We have this whole story built around this myth. Then that's fun to me. Like, that's a fun thought to think about, right? It's fun to think about reading the Bible, especially in the New Testament, and knowing it has been heavily manipulated and heavily put into what's going to be in service to the power of the religion. So I know the Bible's manipulated. When I read the New Testament, I know I'm not getting the whole picture, because first of all, there's no women around. We know women are deeply spiritual. The priestess, like, it's a big part. So the women have been removed. The drugs have been removed, right? We know, like, looking at other traditions, especially like the Dionysus tradition, like the Christ, and a great book on this that also helped me was reading The Immortality Key by Brian Marowisky, who went in and did some deep work around the ergot and this element that would be present in wine that was representative of LSD. When people were drinking wine, they weren't getting drunk, they were tripping, because the alcohol content, only the way we get it today is through heat. They didn't have those ways of distilling. So most often there's other substances going on. So when Christ is serving wine, he's not serving our wine, he's serving something different. So what is that, right? Like, playing with these ideas and these concepts and letting things start to connect, to me, has just been such a blast. And it's just opened up the possibilities of, what is Christ consciousness? What is this story that we're all kind of really looking at?
So if you remove fear from the equation, which MDMA really does that, cuts off the fear receptor, brings you right into your heart. I found I was in play mode and possibility mode. So what I hear you saying right now is, if you remove the fear, then what is actually possible, not just in life, but in this book that we were told to either, basically you have to love it or hate it. It's like you have to sell your soul to this book, because they basically say this is God. And if you don't believe that, then you're the atheist. You're who they would run through with a sword. The last people they would kill were in the early 1800s, when the Catholic Church was still killing people, not just witches, killing people that would not profess Christ, and we're not swear allegiance to the actual church. So, so play mode. Let's go to play mode. What is assisting you in play mode? Where are you going with play mode? What do you see are possibilities that you never saw before?
I mean, it's so interesting. So my partner Tiffany and I, we talk a lot about this. Obviously, we're on the same path in many ways. And it's so interesting as we've done our work, how when we come back to it, often it's like the play now is looking at the wisdom. So I had to read the Bible literally to fit into, again, that was a box, right? This is the literal word of God. So that literalism is such a removal of wisdom, because we know in the wisdom traditions, wisdom will never play out literally. That's actually what makes it wisdom. It's hard to understand. It's a parable, right? So these teachings of Jesus are, could I get to the place of saying this doesn't have to be literal, but is there wisdom? So playing with the Sermon on the Mount, for example, right? This really beautiful core teaching of the Christ, and especially how it's represented in Matthew, which again, not all the Gospels talk about the Sermon on the Mount. But when we talk about the sermon, we're talking the Gospel of Matthew. And so in that 3-chapter run, I think 5 through 8, we get these like crazy teachings of Christ and playing with the idea of like, the Beatitudes, right? And I think the first one, it's not a paraphrase, is the idea that like, blessed are you when you're at the end of your rope, because it's there that when you let go, you'll experience God. Whew, what is that? Like, what does that mean for life? What does that mean to like getting to the point where you're literally like at the edge, and blessed are you when you can let go of that rope? There's something on the other side. And then you start playing with the tarot, and you start playing with the card of the Fool, which I have hanging on my wall over here. And this principle that maybe the only way to get what you really want is to step off the cliff. Is that saying the same thing? It could be.
Wow. And to be the fool, to be the apparent fool.
Right. So
I just got chills, man. I just got fucking chills. Wow.
So that's play for me, right? That's playing with, I love astrology. I love these other wisdom. So I'm going into these other things and then saying, can I see the wisdom of Christ? Can I see Christ consciousness coming through? Can I see Christ coming through these other wisdom traditions? And so far, yes, I've yet to find an area that teaches these wisdoms and you don't hear the same thing being communicated. And that's what I think is so important about the age that we're in right now, because I genuinely do believe we are going to see a return of Christ consciousness. We're going through something. This society, things are shifting, right? There is going to be a significant shift in our world over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And I believe there's going to be a significant return of Christ consciousness and an evolution of this thing that we call Christianity.
I'd say bring it. That sounds exciting to me.
You're ushering it in, right? This is the stuff. We're coming back, and that's what I'm inspired by you, man. So like in this process, I don't know, what resonates for you? What do you see in your experiences of Jesus or Christ consciousness where you see truth?
I'm still trying to sort through it. I just feel I'm supposed to hold space for these conversations. I do not claim to know. I'm hungry. I felt it all my life. And I'm like, I just supposed to do it because like people, I don't want to get to the end of my days in present form and not have fulfilled what I believe is on my heart for a reason. So this is one of the things that's on my heart. I don't know where it's going to go, but I love these conversations because it's real. It's from people that have come to the end of themselves and are either jaded a bit still or not, but they're like, listen, that didn't work, but I'm hungry. And in everything I see in Jesus, it's like whether Christ is true or not, it's a calling up to come to the water. You that are thirsty, come. If you're hungry, come and be restored. There's a restoration that I see, and I want to be restored to all that I can be. And so these conversations are a way of me finding my way and hearing from others and listening to what they've experienced, like yourself, so I can maybe be a little more restored myself.
I love that. And I think it's such a great example of the path of finding restoration, right? How we have to begin to bring in practices. Like you asked a couple minutes ago, like, how do you integrate all of this? Well, integration will always require a practice, something that is tangible, that is consistent, repeatable in your life to give you some structure so that the thing can grow. And that's where, when we talk psychedelics, when I talk about integration work, really there's two words of integration and cultivation. because the integration is the structure for the thing to grow, but then life becomes about cultivating that which has been growing, right? It's the sustainable nature of it, which means pruning, which means all the other things that come into permaculture and how does something actually grow and develop fruit. Because the Christ says, right, you will know them by the fruit that they bear. So for me, one of the points of integration is, what is the fruit in my life, right? Like if I'm talking about all this shit, but like my relationship with my kids, and you're in my energy and you see how I treat my children and it's not consistent, then I'm full of shit, right? I'm not of an integrity. And I lived my life that way. I lived my life in the darkness and not being in integrity. And now there's this shift in myself to say, I'm going to live with radical integrity. I'm going to live with saying, if you want to work with me or you want to engage in my spiritual teachings or whatever, which I have a community of people, I have men that I'm investing in, right? There's stuff that I'm doing. And in that, it's always this encouragement to say, like, if you don't see this being reflected in my life, then you have permission to call me out on it. Because otherwise, what is it, right? Because I experienced that. So often pastors would be from the stage preaching, but I knew their kids and they were fucked. So what is that? Like, and so much teachings of Christ. And then throughout the New Testament, we see these things about consistency. So again, my kids are, they're going through an experience. They're coming from, dual homes, co-parenting. They have a lot of stuff they're going to have to work through later in their lives. I'm fully aware of that. And yet now the life that I'm giving them, I see them in health. I see them engaging. We constantly get compliments on just how awesome our kids are. And it's just, that's the fruit, right? That's not saying like I'm amazing. That's just saying by living these principles, right? Teaching my children about these things. I call them the secrets of the universe. I have 7 secrets of the universe that I'm just constantly trying to teach them. And, my son did a drawing of the Last Supper for 7th grade in art. He called it Hippie Jesus. And Jesus is sitting in the middle, throwing the peace fingers. He's got a guy laying on the table. He's got mushrooms on either side, cracking through. The universe is coming in. And I don't talk about psychedelics with my children. They don't know any of this stuff, but they're picking up these truths. And that to me is, okay, there's the fruit. I'm going to keep going. Like that feels like good fruit. This is worth the effort.
Amazing. Jason, we're going to end it there because we're going to bring you back for a second one on your principles, the 7 spiritual, what did you say?
So 7 secrets of the universe.
So why don't we do a round 2?
All right.
Sometime July or August, whatever. But let's talk about that because I'd like to get into that because that's more the practical application of what you've learned, what you've tried, tested, and proven, and now you're teaching it. So I think that'd be a great show conversation for round 2. Great. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down. That'd be great.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
It's been amazing. Christ Quest, thanks for watching. If you've watched, I'll put show notes in after. We'll end the broadcast here, Jason. We'll keep chatting.
All right. See you later.
One sec. I think we're still live. Hang on. I'll end it here. Here we go. All right.